I'm here with Pete Babcock. Throughout 42 years in the NBA, Pete Babcock has served as a volunteer, scout, regional scout, assistant coach, director of scouting, director of player personnel, vice president of basketball operations, general manager, president, and minority owner with 8 different franchises: the New Orleans Jazz, Los Angeles Lakers, Milwaukee Bucks, San Diego Clippers, Denver Nuggets, Atlanta Hawks, Toronto Raptors, and Cleveland Cavaliers. How you doing today, Pete Babcock?
I'm doing fine, Ryan. How are you?
I'm excellent. I'm honored to have you here. And you have, such an amazing career in the NBA. And I think that one of the ways, I feel like you judge people is by what their peers have to say about them. And some of your peers have so many amazing things to say about you as far as the kind of man you are. Just to read some of them, John Calipari, he said, knowing Pete since my days with the New Jersey Nets, I've grown to appreciate his unique efforts to impact society using the NBA and the game to help young people in particular. And Rick Sun said, aside from his excellent record building teams, the real impact Pete had in basketball was his ability to use the NBA, his teams, and his respective position as a vehicle to reach out and help so many undeserved. And then I wanted to read this one by Sharif Abdul Rahim. He says, not only has Pete had a great impact on the game of basketball, but he has also been an advocate for players, education, philanthropy, and cultural development. His remarkable life experiences program help prepare his players for life after the NBA. Pete is a remarkable example of what it means to be a true champion and leader. His deep and far-reaching impact on professional basketball has been felt at every level and across multiple generations. Those are some amazing reviews by your peers.
Well, I'm humbled. I'm also very lucky to have worked with all those people, and they're all great people. So I've been very fortunate in my career to be surrounded by uh, talented people, but also people who were like-minded, who cared about what was happening in the world and cared about what's happening in the community. So I've been pretty lucky.
Amazing. Like I feel like you've lived this amazing life. And as someone who's been a long time NBA fan and the role you've played, I salute you and I'm honored to have you here. What inspired your innovative path from a volunteer scout to an NBA executive with multiple roles, including GM, president, and minority owner?
Oh, that's a great question. I started when I was in college. I decided I played in junior college for 2 years. Uh, Had an opportunity to go to 8 or 9 schools who were lower level, four-year schools. I wasn't a great player, and I decided I was a student during the 1960s, so I was really interested in the civil rights movement that really captured my imagination and my attention, and which I talk about in the book. Um, and then, so I thought, you know what I'm going to do? Basketball is just a game. I'm not going to go any further with it. So I'm going to go to law school, get my degree in political science. I'm going to go to law school, use that as a vehicle to help me in a political career, and in my idealistic mind, help save the world, make it a better place, right? Help people who need help. Well, I started law school. I lasted 1 week in law school, literally 1 week,
Yeah,
not
I was
3 year
listening on the
program.
interview. You weren't, your heart
Yeah.
wasn't in
Yeah,
it.
I sat there in the class. I had no passion for this. I don't know if I can do this for 3 years. So I'm thinking to myself that week in law school, what do I have a passion for? And it was basketball. And at that point, I'm thinking the only thing that I really can do that capable of doing is coaching high school basketball. So I started that venue, the high school basketball career, and volunteered to be an assistant coach at my old high school in Phoenix, Arizona, and loved it. Had a great time as a volunteer, working as a substitute teacher every day, but being a volunteer coach. And then the next year, I got a full-time teaching and coaching job at another high school in Phoenix as a freshman basketball coach, not a varsity coach, but a freshman coach, and teaching U.S. history um, every day. Um, the Phoenix Suns had come to town, and I'd go down to games, and I would think to myself, if I could do anything in the world, this is what I would do. I have no idea how to get there. So I invested in videotape machine, and these those days they had just come out. They were these huge, giant units, great big videotapes, and so I bought one and I videotaped every NBA game I could possibly record, which wasn't like today where you can see games every night. It was the game of the week on the weekends, and the Phoenix Suns games were all televised. So I'm recording all those games, and I took a whole season and I studied the tapes. I broke down the tape. I charted their offensive plays, that team, special situations, reports on players, all that kind of stuff to educate myself about the inner workings of each team. At the end of the year, and again, we had no computers in those days or no emails. I wrote a letter to every GM and head coach, and I just said, "You don't know me. I'm a high school coach. I live in Phoenix, Arizona. Here's a report I wrote on your team. If you think it's any good, I want to volunteer to scout for free for you." One team said yes. It was the New Orleans Jazz. Elgin Baylor was the head coach. A guy named Bill Birdka, a longtime lifer in the NBA, as well as a college coach before that, was the GM, and he let me scout for free for them. And so for 2 years, I scouted for free, made my mistakes, got better, met other people in the NBA. Jack McCloskey hired me with the Lakers as a part-time scout. After 2 years of scouting for free, Jack was Jerry West's assistant coach with the Lakers, and then Don Nelson hired me in Milwaukee to be a regional scout, and then I went to work for Paul Silas as an assistant coach, and so it just kind of kept evolving. I didn't have a plan of like someday I'm going to be a general manager. In fact, when I started off, I thought coaching was what I was going to do, and then after a few years of being on the bench with Paul Silas. I realized that most of those individuals being hired as head coaches were either former Division I coaches or former players, NBA players, and I was neither one. So I thought, and I had a chance to move in the front office, so I did, and then my front office career took off from there. But what happened in the back of my mind, though, Ryan, was still the social injustice that was going on in our country, and so I started thinking, well, what as I got into the front office, what can we do as a franchise in this community to make a difference? And so each team I was with, we tried to come up with unique programs that would deal with underserved communities and um, try to use the game as a vehicle to reach those young, particularly young people, not just young people, but mainly young people. So it just kind of built and grew from there.
That's really incredible. And you created this program called the Fast Break for Life Tour. Could you tell us about your passion for Black history and humanitarian work and how that influenced programs like the Fast Break for Life Tour?
Okay, well, a Fast Break Life Tour was a Native American program. What happened was I was with the Denver Nuggets. Bill Young, our PR director, had received a call from a woman on a reservation, and I may have this not quite correct, but she was a huge Alex English fan, and one of her children was really struggling with something, substance abuse or mental issue, something. I'm not sure what it was, and wanted to know if there's any way Alex could talk to the child, and and Alex, I think did, and then Bill and Alex came to me and just said, there's a higher degree of teenage suicide on the reservations than there is in the inner city. There's a higher degree of substance abuse because the isolation in the reservations. So we need to come up with some plan. So that was the genesis of the program. And so we partnered with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and we started this program, Fast Break for Life. And we would take players and coaches on a volunteer basis every September to a different reservation, wherever the greatest need was that year. And we'd spend a few days on the reservation working with kids, talking about healthy lifestyle, making good decisions, how to live your dream, um, and use basketball as the vehicle because basketball was the biggest sport on most of the reservations. And so it just kept blossoming, blossoming. So we started in Denver. When I left Denver to go to the Atlanta Hawks, took the program with me to Atlanta, and our players in Atlanta embraced it. Dikembe Mutombo and Steve Smith and Alan Henderson and uh, a bunch of guys all volunteered their time. Lenny Wilkins went on trips with us. So we went to a different reservation every year. And so that was the Native American program. The my interest in Black history started back when I was in Phoenix as a high school coach. I told you I was interested in the civil rights movement, and then I became the youngest member of the board of directors of the Phoenix Urban League. And when I was 20 years old, and one of the board members, happened to be Jesse Owens.
Wow.
So I got to work with Jesse for 10 years and learning from him and his experiences, and that motivated me to even do more. And so that kind of kept growing and growing and growing. So I started studying African American history. I was teaching U.S. history in high school, so I did a lot of research, and nobody was teaching Black history in the high schools at that time. This is early 1970s, and when I say nobody, I'm talking about in Phoenix, Arizona,
Right.
in a school that was predominantly white.
Yeah.
Uh, we had a few black students, we had a few Hispanic students, uh, but it was predominantly a white high school. So I introduced Black history as a part of the U.S. history course, uh, and it just kept growing. And then when I get in the NBA, we continue it. So uh, we started a number of programs in the NBA. The anti-gang program in Denver was a big one.
That's incredible. I was reading Courts of Justice, and in the prologue, you start off the book about Donald Sterling working for him, and basically like how cheap he was. Like the general manager, I think that he hired wanted to draft Brains, and like you wanted to
And
draft Tom Chambers.
yeah, Danny Brains, yeah.
Danny Brains, yeah.
Yeah.
Could you talk about that?
Yeah, well, in those days, the staffs were very small. So we had Paul Silas was the head coach, Phil Westfall was his first assistant, and I was the second assistant, and that was the whole basketball staff. And then we had a trainer. That was it. We had no scouts. So my job as the second assistant was to prepare for the draft. So I'm on the bench for like 60 of our 82 games. The rest of the time, I'm out watching college players and preparing for the draft. I'm the only one on the staff doing it. And so when the draft came around, they turned it over to me. I'm an assistant coach, and I'm really running the draft, right? So um, I had told Paul about, the guy I was pushing was Tom Chambers. And the morning of the draft, our general manager came in, and in those days we had 10 rounds, so the draft went on forever. Started on the West Coast at 9 o'clock in the morning and went all day long into the night. And he came in and he said he had a dream the night before that we took Danny Brains and he was the guy that we should take. And I said, well, with all due respect, he's not even close to the player of Tom Chambers. He said, Danny Brains is a nice player. Uh, and supposed to be a great person, but he's not the player that Tom Chambers is. Tom Chambers is a potential star player in the league. Danny is a role player in the league, basically. And I tried to talk Paul into it, and Paul hadn't been out scouting, so he didn't really know the players. And and the GM was not going to change his mind. We were going to take Danny Brains. Fortunately, Philadelphia drafted ahead of us, and they took Danny Brains, so he's off the board, and we were able to take Tom Chambers. So it ended up working out,
Yeah,
but it was a little nerve-wracking at the time because I was a young assistant coach. I'm the one that's tasked with making this decision, and the GM is going to take somebody different, and it worked out great. And Tom went on and had a great career. Danny had a nice career, but Tom was MVP of the All-Star game one year, and was a big time player.
for sure. Yeah, Tom Chambers was a star, like in the
Yeah.
league, and that's a really interesting story. And also in the prologue, you talk about Donald Sterling being very cheap, where like the athletic tape, I think, was an issue. What was your initial impression of Donald Sterling when he first bought the Clippers, and how did that change over time?
Well, when I went there, Irv Levin owned the team, and so I worked under Irv Levin's ownership for one year, and Irv didn't seem to be really engaged or involved. We didn't see much of him. Um, and so he sells the team to Donald Sterling. Donald right away comes in, and I remember Paul Silas, Bill Westfall, and I are walking around the arena with him, and and we're taking him in the locker rooms, and he's talking about how, oh, we're going to redo the locker rooms, we're going to redo this, redo that, because the San Diego Sports Arena was pretty run down, and so we were all excited. We thought this is great. I mean, all of a sudden, things are going to get more professional around here, and we're going to be going the right direction. And locker room never got done. No improvements were made. The offices stayed the same. Nothing changed. And and just the opposite happened. He called the office one time, and I don't remember which year it was. I worked for him for 3 years. One of the years he called the office, and he said he was looking at the budget, and he saw how much money we spend on athletic tape, tape ankles and athletic injuries and all that kind of stuff. And he goes like, "That's a crazy amount of money." He said, "I have a friend who owns a sporting goods store, and Sterling used to drive down to our home games from LA because he lived in LA, not San Diego." He said, "I'll just bring a box of tape down the trunk of my car when I come to home games." And I remember saying, "Well, you don't understand. We use a box of tape every day. I
Yeah.
mean, you got to tape, ankles on 11 players in those days." And, and he goes, "Well, start reusing it." I said, you don't reuse this stuff.
Freeze.
I can't, yeah, we cut it off. And once you've taped an ankle, I mean, you can't use it again, I think he probably knew that, but he just was acting like he didn't understand why we were using so much tape. But that's just one of many situations that arose that most franchises didn't have to deal with.
What lessons did you learn while directing the NBA pre-draft camp for over 20 years, and how has scouting evolved?
It evolved tremendously when we started. That camp started in 81 or around 1981, maybe 82. I can't remember exactly the year, but it was started with Jerry Colangelo, Pete Newell, Stu Inman were the driving forces behind it. And they had sold the league on doing this. So it had never been done before. They were going to bring in the best college players into Chicago as kind of a midway point of the country and have workouts every morning for a week straight and then have games at night, divide the players into four teams. And I think after 2 years, Jerry Colangelo called me out of the blue, and he said, and because I had coached in the camp one year, Jerry called me. He said, "Listen, uh, Stu and Pete Newell and I have got the thing up and running. We're going to turn it over to some younger guys to run this camp now. Are you interested?" And I said, "Well, yeah," because I was looking for things to do to be involved. And so I said, "Great." So so he gave me the opportunity to direct the camp, and then I called Rick Sund, who was a good friend of mine, and said, "Do you want to help me with this?" And Rick did, and we ran that for well over 20 years until they changed the format. But um, we adjusted a lot of things, like the Pete Newell and Stu and Jerry did a great job of initiating the whole program. But what I was observing was that we'd have skill workout in the morning, and then we'd have uh, 3 games at night. So there were 6 teams, not 4 teams. So we had 6 teams. So there were 3 games every night. What I started noticing was that in that last game at night, people who were there scouting were their attention span was waning. They were getting tired because they sat through 2 games. Now I guess this was a third game. And also there were guys that didn't really like the morning workouts. I'm talking about evaluators, GMs and coaches, whoever there. They didn't like watching the skill workout. They just wanted to watch them play. So we revamped it and we moved 1 game to the morning and then only 2 games at night. So we still had skill workout and station work, but we had a game in the morning to keep everybody's attention, 2 games at night that made it shorter, and then we just kept tweaking it a little bit as we went along to try to improve it. And it was a great venue for scouting for all of us because in those days, what you did is you went to Portsmouth, Virginia, to the PIT, the Portsmouth Invitational Tournament that had been going on for years. They bring in like 64 of really good college players in the country. That they had a smattering of first round picks, but a lot of second round picks. And later, again, we had 10 rounds in those days. And then you'd leave there and you'd fly to Hawaii and
Wow.
spend a week in Hawaii for the Aloha Classic, where like the top 32 players in college were there, and most of them showed up. Unless you were the number one pick, almost everybody showed up and played there. Um, and then you go from there, you go back home for a while. Then Chicago would be in early June. So these were the scouting venues where you could see all the best players. What happened, the reason that started to fall apart was that agents began holding players out. They didn't want their players to get hurt, or they didn't want weaknesses to be exposed, or whatever. They had the reasons they didn't want their players to compete. And so Hawaii was the first one that fell apart. And so we moved that tournament. We didn't move it, but the league moved it. Um, Phoenix Suns took it over and ran it in Phoenix. Then the Orlando Magic ran it for a few years and then disbanded it because too many good players weren't showing up. And Chicago, same kind of thing happened, but it trickled down. Uh, I'd say around the mid 2000s, the first 10 years of the 2000s, probably around 2007 or 8 or something. I can't remember the year. The league disbanded the format. So there were no more games in Chicago because agents were holding their players out. So they still have the Chicago pre-draft camp that they call it a combine now, and there are no team competitions anymore. So it's changed quite a bit.
Yeah, that sounds like an incredible experience. What are some of your most memorable player relationships or mentorship roles throughout your 42-year NBA career?
Oh wow, that's a great question. I mean, the first one that jumps out at me is Dikembe Mutombo. Uh, Dikembe was an extraordinary human being. Forget the fact that he could play basketball, but he was just an extraordinary person. And when we recruited him as a free agent, um, I remember he was in Denver and we were recruiting him hard. We flew him into Atlanta and I didn't know him really at that point, but you know, picked him up at the airport and I said, I'm going to take you to meet a number of people today, but I want to take you to the most important people first. And I took him to a school, Ragsdale Elementary School in the inner city in Atlanta. And we had a male mentoring program that we ran there because most of those kids had no male figures in their lives. Uh, and the principal, who was a lady, had asked me, I said, "What can we do to help your school?" And she said, "Just be here. If men would come and work with the students every once a week or something." So I recruited a lot of high profile males from the community, sportscasters, newscasters, people that the kids would recognize that they see on TV and not just the sports world. And we would go once a week to this school and work with kids. Well, so I take the Dikembe. He has no idea where we're going to go, right? So we drive to this school, and he's looking at me like, "So who are we going to see here?" And I said, "Oh, you'll see." So we go in, and I introduce him to these fourth graders that I worked with once a week. And I said, "Okay, Dikembe, these are the most important people you're going to meet today. You're going to meet the mayor, you're going to meet other people, but these are the most important people you're going to meet because they're our future." And I think that got his attention. I like the fact that it got his attention, that it meant something to him. He was really kind of touched by it, and it played out. We signed Dikembe, and then this is the kind of person he was. He used to like to go on the Fast Break for Life tours with us every September. And one year he said to me, "I want to go this year. I know you're going to Montana to the Little Bighorn. I really want to go, but I've got to be in the Congo because he was building a hospital in his mom's name in the Congo." And he said, "I got to be there for meetings and whatever." I said, "Dikembe, don't worry about it. You go all the time. We got guys that'll go." And he goes, "Nah, I got to find a way." He flew from the Congo, met me in Salt Lake City. We flew together from Salt Lake City up to Montana. He was in a business suit that he wore from the Congo. So he flew across the world to volunteer his time for 2 days on this reservation working with kids. That's just the kind of person he was, and Steve Smith, same way. Steve Smith's like the, one of the greatest people you ever meet. Uh, we were lucky because we had so many guys like that. The Grant Longs and Tyrone Corbins and Andrew Young and Andrew Lang, um, Sharif Abdul Rahim. I mean, the list goes on and on and on of just good people that behind the scenes they never said no. If I said, you want to go with me to read with these kids, or you want to, they never said no. They always stepped up.
Yeah, I've always been like a fan of Dikembe Mutombo, and I admire the fact that he was a Christian. One of the things that I was looking at, I think, an interview, you were telling a story, I guess, about a horse story, and he falls off a horse. Can you tell that story?
Yeah, yeah. Excuse me. Yeah, we're in North Dakota on a reservation one September. It was Steve Smith, Alan Henderson, Dikembe, and me. And we meet with our schedule is we usually go in the first evening and meet with the tribal council, and they would educate us about their tribe, particular culture differences between their tribe and others, and what problems their kids had, what we need to address the next day at the reservation school. So the Kembe says, "Well, tomorrow morning before we go to the school, could we ride horses?" And Steve and Alan were like, they've never been on horseback in their life, and they're going like, what? And the Kevin goes, oh no, you'll love it. I rode in Mexico last year. You love it. So the tribal leader said, oh sure, no problem at all. So they picked us up early from wherever we were staying, some lodge, and they took us to this corral and horses ready for each one of us, and a handler holding on to each the reins of each horse. And we all get on our horses. Steve and Steve and Alan very cautiously get up on their horses because this is all new to them. I had a little bit of riding experience, but anyway, I'd been around horses a lot. So I get up on the horse. Dikembe jumps up on his horse. His legs are so long they hang down past the stirrups. I mean, he could almost touch the ground. I felt sorry for the horse. It's like he was going to kill this horse. But so he's saying, Steve and Alan are a little jittery and a little nervous. And Dikembe's going, oh, you guys, there's nothing to it. He said, I rode in Mexico. If you want to go, you just kick your horse. And if you want to stop, you just go, whoa, and the horse stops. And he kicks his horse, and the horse takes off running. Luckily, we're in a corral, and the horse is running on around the inside of the corral fairly fast. And he drops the reins and doesn't say, whoa, he just goes, stop, stop, stop. And, you know, and the horse is not stopping. And so he slides off the back of the horse on purpose and falls against the back of the fence. Luckily, he doesn't get hurt. But I'm sitting there thinking like, we just lost our all-star center. How am I going to explain this one? And Steve and Alan were saying to their handlers, "Get me off this thing. Get me off this thing right now. Don't leave me get me off." So, yeah, that was our horse riding incident. When the Steve and Alan went back and told the rest of the team about it, I remember Christian Leitner being all excited about it, going, "Oh man, I want to go next year. I want to have that experience." So, but yeah, Dikembe was like one of a kind.
That's an amazing story. How do you reflect on the challenges and successes of your tenure with teams like the Denver Nuggets and Atlantic Hawks, which had consistent playoff runs under your leadership?
Well, we were fortunate we had really good people in Denver, and we had really good coaching, totally different kinds of coaching. Doug Moe was our coach in Denver the whole 6 years I was there. Doug probably was the most unorthodox coach during that period of time, but was really kind of a genius with a wide open passing game. The way that he taught the game, like it was basically pass and cut and don't stand still, just keep moving. You didn't have to pick and roll. You didn't have to, go one. He would go crazy if you held the ball for 4 or 5 seconds. It's like when you catch the ball, you either shoot it or you drive it or you pass it, but you don't just stand there and hold the ball. And then once you pass it, you cut hard to the basket and clear out if you don't get a pass back. He was really good with that. And people thought he didn't coach defense because we scored so many points every year, but he really emphasized defense strongly. Um, so we had good coaching. We had I would say overachieving players in both places, high character guys. We get to Atlanta, and most of the years I was there, I was with Lenny Wilkins, who was the true professional, and players loved playing for him because he treated everybody with great respect. And we had the kind of players that he that responded well to him and then he worked well with, and that they showed up to do their job every day. You know, the Tyrone Corbins and the Grant Longs and the Craig Elos and Steve Smith and Dikembe. And these guys came to work every day. That you didn't have to yell and scream at them. They did their job. Um, so we overachieved. We never got quite to the promised land, playing the championship, but uh, but we did overachieve and we won, a number of games. But what I think I was most proud of is that there's an award called the J. Walter Kennedy Award that's given to one person in the NBA every year for who gives the most back to their community. And we had seven winners of that between the two teams, seven winners. Dikembe won it twice, but I don't know. Not sure. I don't know. I don't know what the records are, but I don't think that's pretty unusual that those two teams would produce seven winners of the Kennedy Award. So I always felt really good about that.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think that says a lot. Can you share your thoughts on how media narratives influence NBA players' careers based on your experience addressing false narratives?
You get, you know, when I started, there was no social media. When I started my career, there's no such thing as social media. We didn't have computers, we didn't have iPhones, we didn't have, there just wasn't social media. In fact, talk radio didn't really even start till I was in Denver. Um, I think unfortunately that there's pluses and minuses to it. I think on the downside, you unfortunately you have people who are around players who get in their ear, who are telling them, "Hey, you got to score more points. You got to, you got to hold, you got to handle the ball more. Like changing their role because people are telling them that's how you're going to get paid is by how you score." And what kind of stats you put up. And that's the negative side of it. The positive side is that um, fans have become pretty sophisticated and and in most NBA cities fairly knowledgeable about what they're looking at. So there are pluses and minuses to it, but yeah, you just hate to see. I always hated to see players get locked into the selfishness of like, it's all about me. It's my game, not a team game. When I was in Denver, we had TR Dunn, who started at the off guard for us, and Doug would have to beg him to take a shot. He was a great defender. He could defend points, off guard, small forwards, strong, physical, highly intelligent defender. He could jump screens. You couldn't set a pick on the guy. Uh, and Doug played him because he was a great defender. But he'd have to like beg him, like, take a shot once in a while, take a shot. TR didn't care. He just wanted to help the team and do his job. And so he played in the league for a long time because of that. So those days I really enjoyed because you had guys that were playing for the team.
Yeah. I feel like in today's era, you rarely see that. You don't really see like selflessness. And a lot of times I feel like it's so much emphasis on like the superstar aspect as opposed to like, true team sports. What motivated you to write your biography, Courts of Justice, A Life in Basketball and Activism? And what key stories or themes will readers discover?
Well, the genesis of the book was in the beginning, just writing about I have two daughters, and they were encouraging me to write about my experiences to leave the stories for them and for our grandkids. So that was the genesis of starting it. And then I got to be really good friends with Red Auerbach's biographer, who happens to be 93 years old now and still writes every day. And he just asked me if he could read it. So I sent it to him, and I told him that this is what it was for my kids and grandkids. And he called me and said, "No, you got to do more than it's not just for your kids and grandkids. This needs to get out there." And he really helped me with direction. And so the book is written in two parts. The first part is the history of black basketball and the pioneers that laid the groundwork for today's players and went through all the hardships and stories about what they had to go through and stories that have rarely been told uh, for a number of reasons. But stories about Red Auerbach and how he got started and his relationship with Bobby Douglas, who was the head coach and owner of the New York Renaissance in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. They were like the Renaissance were the dominant team. They were the first uh, all black coached, owned, and players. Uh, and they all had signed contracts, and they were a dominant team. But Red, as a 16-year-old high school student or player in Brooklyn, took the train to Harlem by himself, bought a ticket to go to the Harlem Renaissance Ballroom where they played their home games. He was the only white person in the crowd. Uh, Bobby Douglas, who was coaching the team and owned the team, actually saw him sitting up there because he stood out like a sore thumb. And after the game, Red managed to get into the locker room, introduce him to Coach Douglas, and just said, "Would you mind if I ask you some strategy questions?" And that's all detailed in the book. But they develop a relationship. Bobby Douglas helps him get his college scholarship to college, helps him with his coaching career, and I detail all that in the book to the point where it actually helped Red indirectly get to the Celtics, and then helped him make a decision to draft the first African American player in Chuck Cooper. So all those stories are told, uh, and most of them are very have, have been not published, or if they were published, I think my friend who's the biographer, Ken Dooley, I think he said it was published in one uh, book one time, and so it's rarely been told. So there's stories about that. I was fortunate enough to work with John Lewis for over 14 years in Atlanta, and became good friends. And we worked on programs together, gun buyback programs, and um, so you can read in the book all about that, and how Chuck Cooper, his story, how Red made that decision. Uh, you'll read about how Red Auerbach actually signed Sweetwater Clifton to a contract, and the NBA commissioner disapproved it
Wow.
because the the thought was Podoloff, who was the commissioner at the time, didn't want two blacks on one team because no blacks were playing in the NBA. It was 1950, and that was the prevailing thought among a lot of people. And so he sent Sweetwater Clifton to the Knicks instead. And it talks about there's an interview with Earl Lloyd that was done just a few months before his death. That's all in the book. Um, so it covers all that.
Oh, it's
So uh, um, so it's going to gets into all the John Lewis stories. We talk about the anti-gang program in Denver. Uh, go into quite a bit of detail on that.
it's gonna cut off soon, but you could order your book, pre-order it now at PeteBabcock.com. Pete, I'm honored, like to speak with you, and thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate you. This was amazing.
My pleasure, Ryan. Anytime. Keep getting the word out there about educating people about all the pioneers that came before today's